Apple is known for perfection, clean design, silent confidence, total control. Nothing accidental, nothing rushed, every detail intentional. When Apple builds something, the world assumes it will work. Not eventually, not after fixes, but perfectly, the first time. That reputation wasn't marketing, it was discipline. So when the company announced a $5 billion headquarters, expectations went through the roof. People didn't question if it would be great, only how great. This wasn't supposed to be just an office. It was supposed to be a statement. Not just another campus, not just another Silicon Valley project, not glass towers and parking lots. This was meant to be the physical embodiment of Apple's philosophy. Minimal, elegant, obsessively controlled. A building that felt designed, not constructed. A place where nothing looked forced. But what most people don't know is this. Apple's dream headquarters came dangerously close to being abandoned completely. Not delayed, not downsized, abandoned. This is the story of Apple Park, and how one of the richest companies on Earth almost walked away from its boldest vision. A vision so ambitious, it nearly collapsed under its own weight. The story begins in 2011, at a moment when Apple was already changing the world. Steve Jobs was still alive, but his health was failing. He knew time was limited, and this project mattered deeply to him. Jobs personally appeared before the Cupertino City Council to pitch the idea. Not through executives, not through lawyers, himself, not with slides, not with charts, not with financial projections, but with passion, the same passion that built the iPhone. Jobs described a massive circular structure, a perfect ring, nearly 1 mile wide. A building that looked like a spaceship had quietly landed in Silicon Valley. No sharp edges, no clutter, surrounded by trees, hidden from the outside world, powered by clean energy, designed to breathe naturally, designed to disappear into nature. He didn't call it a headquarters. He didn't call it an office. He called it a home for innovation, a place people wouldn't want to leave, and at first the city was impressed, very impressed. But admiration didn't mean approval, and it didn't mean easy. Behind the excitement, city officials had concerns, big concerns. The campus would be enormous, larger than many neighborhoods. Traffic would increase, thousands of employees commuting daily. Infrastructure would be strained, roads, power, water. But Apple promised solutions, carefully prepared, well-rehearsed. They would plant thousands of trees, restore green land, use renewable energy, solar panels everywhere, build underground parking, keep cars out of sight, reduce environmental impact. Leave the land better than before? On paper, it sounded responsible, almost utopian. But the real problems weren't political, they weren't environmental, they were technical and far more dangerous. Apple's design was unlike anything built before. Not just unusual, unprecedented. The entire structure was a perfect ring, no breaks, no shortcuts, nearly 1 mile in circumference. An architectural nightmare, made almost entirely of curved glass. Glass that didn't yet exist. Here's the problem. Curved glass at that scale didn't exist. Not at Apple's standards, not even close. Manufacturers tried, then tried again. Apple rejected sample after sample. Tiny distortions, invisible flaws. Manufacturers simply couldn't produce glass panels that were flawless enough, and Apple refused to compromise. Even microscopic imperfections were unacceptable. If you could see it once, it was rejected forever. And each rejection meant more time, more money, more delays. The schedule began to slip quietly, then noticeably. Then came the obsession with details. Details no one else would notice. Apple wanted seamless floors, no visible joints, no uneven transitions, no texture changes. That sounds small, almost petty. But on a building this massive, it meant reinventing construction methods. Entire techniques had to be redesigned. Entire sections were torn down and rebuilt. Not because they failed, but because they weren't beautiful enough. Door handles were redesigned repeatedly, again and again. Walls were adjusted by millimeters, sometimes less. Ceilings were reworked to hide vents completely. Nothing mechanical could be visible. Every detail mattered. every surface judged, and every detail slowed everything down. The clock kept ticking, but design wasn't the biggest threat. Engineering was. Apple wanted huge open spaces, rooms without visual interruptions, very few visible columns. No clutter, clean lines everywhere, nothing structural exposed. That created a nightmare for structural engineers, a quiet panic behind the scenes. California is earthquake territory. Buildings must bend, they must flex, they must absorb movement. A rigid, glass-heavy ring with minimal support was extremely risky, potentially catastrophic. Engineers warned Apple, repeatedly, this design would require unprecedented reinforcement, custom solutions. It would be expensive, extremely expensive, and it could fail inspections. Publicly, Apple listened, took notes, then ignored most of the advice. By 2014, construction was already behind schedule. The delays were undeniable. Costs were climbing fast, quietly at first. What started as a multi-billion-dollar project began drifting toward the upper limits of what even Apple found reasonable. Contractors struggled to keep up with Apple's demands. Burnout spread fast. Schedules were missed, deadlines rewritten. Entire teams were replaced without ceremony. At one point, workers installed components that passed standard industry inspections, only for Apple to reject them later for aesthetic reasons. Perfectly functional work was scrapped, thrown away, and rebuilt from scratch. The tension reached a breaking point in 2015. Something had to give. Thousands of workers were suddenly sent home. Construction stopped, not because the project was finished, but because it wasn't ready at all. The building lacked basic approvals, fire systems incomplete, interior systems weren't finished, safety checks failed. Apple had announced move-in dates, publicly, dates that simply couldn't happen, not even close. Inside the company, frustration grew, silently. Then came the most critical moment, the moment everything changed. Steve Jobs was gone, and with him, the project's shield. He had been the campus's strongest defender, the one person who would never accept compromise. Without him, Apple Park lost its emotional anchor, its reason for existing at any cost. Executives began asking hard questions, questions that were once unthinkable. Was this building worth it? Was it a distraction? Was it pulling focus from products, from innovation? Quietly, very quietly, discussions began about pulling the plug. No announcements, no leaks. Scrapping the project wouldn't be simple. Billions were already gone. The structure was partially complete. The land permanently changed, but Apple could afford it. That wasn't the issue. The real cost wasn't money. It was reputation. Admitting failure on the world's most ambitious corporate campus would send a dangerous message. Still, for a moment, walking away was genuinely considered. Eventually, Apple made a decision, a final one. If this building was going to exist, it would exist without compromise. They doubled down, harder than ever. Budgets increased, deadlines pushed, standards raised even higher. If that was possible, Apple brought in new specialists, the best available. Custom solutions were engineered, nothing off the shelf. Glass manufacturing finally caught up. After years of failure, seismic reinforcements were redesigned, ventilation rebuilt, entire systems refined again and again. Slowly, painfully, progress resumed. By 2017, Apple Park was ready, at least on the surface. Employees began moving in, even while construction continued. Some areas remained unfinished for months, but the vision was real. Finally, a 175-acre campus, over 12,000 employees, powered almost entirely by renewable energy, quiet, clean, the largest naturally ventilated office building in the world. From the outside, it looked effortless, perfect, inevitable. But behind the glass, Apple Park became a lesson in obsession, in control, in how perfection can become dangerous. Today, Apple Park stands as one of the most expensive corporate buildings ever created. Not because Apple needed it, but because Apple refused to accept anything less than its ideal. It almost failed not because of money, but because perfection is fragile, and sometimes it's the hardest thing to build. Would you want to work inside a building this controlled? Or does creativity need a little chaos? Comment below. Thanks for watching. Like and subscribe for more stories you won't hear anywhere else.